Hi everyone, thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Anya Siddiqui and we have here a special guest for the first time is Sharina Wu. Hi Sharina. Oh, you're muted, Sharina.
Hi, everyone.
So thank you so much, Sharina, for joining us today. We're really excited. It's a great webinar that's going to focus on everything pretty much that you need to know about job search. So she's going to cover resumes, cover letters, interviews. And before I hand it over to Sharina, I just want to make sure that everyone is properly connected. So please know that you are all on listen only mode and we will not be able to hear you, but Sharina will be taking your questions after her presentation. And for that, please type your questions into the Q&A tab found at the bottom of your screen. And for best results, please use a laptop or a desktop computer using Google Chrome as your browser. And if you are using mobile devices such as tablets or cell phones, I recommend downloading the Zoom app. It's super easy. And it's easy to follow and listen to the presentation as well. And your feedback is always important to us, so please do fill out the survey at the end of the webinar. And all of our webinars are always recorded, so you will get a recording of the webinar within 48 hours, or after a few hours, the recording will be ready. So you can use the same Zoom registration link that you used today to sign on as the recordings. You can watch it again, you can share it, and all of our recordings are later posted on our YouTube channel as well. Just to tell you a little bit about ACCES, we've been around for over 30 years helping job seekers such as yourselves. Just in the past year alone, we were able to serve over 34,000 job seekers. We work with over 2,200 employers, different community partners, sponsors, associations, organizations. We work very closely with everyone who's in the GTA and the community helping job seekers. And we have over 30 tailored programs, which include our sector-specific bridging programs, our pre-arrival program. There's programs tailored for women, for youth. So check out our website and see what's best for you. We've got 7 locations in the GTA, but right now everything is working virtually. It's business as usual. Everyone is working 9 to 5 to help clients, except everything is online. So if anything, you're able to attend full-time courses or programs that we have from the comfort of your own home. So I'm going to stop my screen sharing here. Sharina, you can share yours, and I'm going to hand it over to you now.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Sharina. I'm currently an associate consultant at Bain & Company. To give you a bit of background, as a consultant, I work with my team to solve problems for our clients' most challenging and top-of-mind problems. Over the past year, I've performed work for several clients, including developing an international expansion strategy, a post-acquisition integration, and several due diligences for potential private equity M&A. Prior to Bain, I also worked at TD and Rogers in marketing innovation and operations, respectively. That said, I'm really excited to be here today with you all to discuss my tips on recruiting, especially in our current environment. So feel free to send through any questions in the chat throughout the presentation, and I'll try my best to address them, or after the presentation. With that, let's get started. So before I dig in too far into the presentation, we'd love to just take a moment for you all to think about, what is your goal? What are you trying to get out of this experience? Are you looking for a specific sector? Are you looking for a specific role? At the end of the day, it's really important to identify what your goal is before you start your job search and your recruiting process. And today I'm planning to share with you some tips and tricks on the following topics. So everything from cover letters and resumes to your interviews to networking and some virtual best practices at the end. So why don't we start with cover letters and resumes and how to make those stand out using the ACE framework. So what is a resume? Your resume is really an opportunity for you to showcase your academic record, your work experiences, your community involvement. And some tips here would be to be really results oriented. And by that, I mean, what was the outcome of your action? So for example, when I was at TD, I published some internal white papers on topics such as immersive technologies. I discussed the strategic implications for TD, and I built business cases that were utilized by the chief digital officer to select an opportunity to pilot a new immersive technology. So in that sentence, it really allows you to capture and emanate what are the actions that you performed, but more importantly, what were the results that you drove? And definitely put your GPA on your resume. I think it's really important. You're not really hiding anything from your employer, especially as a new graduate. It gives them some kind of baseline to see where you're at if you don't have too many work experiences prior. And don't forget to put your interest at the end. I often find that that's the most enjoyable part of reviewing resumes as a resume reviewer for Bain. It allows us to capture a little bit about you, what you're interested in, and capture a bit more of your personality. In terms of your cover letter, this is a space for the company to really get to know you. So what are your interests? What are your passions? What are your accomplishments? And how does that help you integrate into the company? So what I would do here is pick 2 to 3 stories and really just develop them. So by that, what I mean is write about something you're passionate about. If you're looking for a role in education, why are you interested in the sector? Is it because you want to help students develop? Is it because you always really loved learning? And it's important to think deep about this, and that's why I started this off with what's your goal. When you're thinking about the stories that you want to develop, you also want to showcase skills that you have. So for example, you might want to showcase communication skills if you're going for a marketing role, or you might want to showcase your analytical skills if you're looking for an engineering position. You want to showcase why you will provide value to the firm and not necessarily just the other way around. I think it's also important to think about and target your cover letters to the company that you're looking at, because it really allows you to have that personality and also allows them to envision you in the company. Some don'ts here is don't list every person you've ever met from the firm, but if you talk to someone and they really stood out to you and you felt like you really connected, definitely ask them, hey, look, I'm applying for this position, would love to cite you in my cover letter. Is that all right with you for that opportunity? Don't lie about experiences. It's pretty easy to tell when something is above and beyond what you would typically expect at that level. And when you're going into your interview, or when you finally get the job, it's going to be pretty clear that you didn't necessarily tell the truth. And make sure, I know sometimes in the recruiting process, you might be putting several resumes and cover letters together, but don't list the wrong company. That is like the number one issue I often find on cover letters. So it's a silly mistake that, like, as long as you prove it, you shouldn't have that come up. So why don't we dig into what the ACE framework is? So it essentially represents the action, context, and the result. The action is really skill focused. So what skill did I gain through a task, project, or situation? And it's often communicated through a strong word. So another example of something that I've done is I conducted an in-depth analysis of market drivers, for example, clinical and conversion and price elasticity, to build a financial model forecasting volume and pricing growth. So the action there is that I conducted that analysis. The context is, why did I do this? Why is this important? What was the gap that I was filling? I was really trying to do this to build that financial model and then forecast the volume and pricing growth. And what was the end result of that? You want to think to yourself, how did your action affect the overall organization? And what difference would the impact be if the work was done ineffectively or not at all? So oftentimes I'll have 2 to 3 bullets under each work experience. One other thing in that space was I also performed a benchmarking analysis against industry peers. And this allowed us to save the client over $310 million, which exceeded the client's initial goal by 210%. So that allows you to kind of capture, like, what's that end result? What's that wow factor? I also find on resumes, if you can, putting numbers-oriented results often really helps the interviewer or resume reviewer really encapsulate what's going on and what was the overall impact that you had. You can also say, for example, if you haven't had a lot of corporate experience and you have more experience, let's say as a sales rep, you could often say enhance the customer experience through building rapport, and I achieved sales levels in the top 10%. So it really showcases that you're a leader wherever you are and you always strive for great results for your clients. Another one that's less corporate oriented, let's say you own a painting company or you work for a painting company, you could say, interviewed over 100 applicants, carefully selecting and training these 15 painters to ensure customers receive quality work, ultimately leading to a 94% customer satisfaction rate. So even in these types of examples where you're not necessarily in a corporate setting, you can still showcase the impact that you've had on the organization. So why don't we now take a quick look at networking. Networking can often be an intimidating process if you've never done it before, but I think it's important. It's definitely an important step to the recruiting process. And after some practice, it definitely gets a bit easier. So when you're networking, you always want to be prepared and keep that goal that we talked about at the beginning in mind. To start, I would definitely have a plan. So define the short list. By this, I mean, define what are the few companies that you really would love to join. If it's in marketing, you might be interested in Unilever, P&G, several other companies as well. If you're interested in consulting, there might be McKinsey, Bain, or BCG. Then after you define this list of companies, you want to think about finding contacts. And the way that to find these contacts is often through LinkedIn or through the company website if you're looking at a smaller company or a startup. And I often would say you can find these contacts through LinkedIn, but if they're in a corporate role, they'll often have an email that's associated with their work email. And you can often find the format for these emails on Google, and would definitely say you could probably get better response rates when you're emailing them rather than going through LinkedIn specifically. Once you've defined your shortlist and find your contacts, you want to set your objectives. So what are you trying to get out of this conversation? Are you trying to just get a job? Are you trying to understand a little bit more about the role? Are you trying to understand more about the industry? What are you trying to gain from that? And that will allow you to be a bit more targeted in what you're reaching out for, as well as targeted in the questions that you're asking. Then you want to draft the outreach. So what I would say on this point is you definitely want to be tailored in how you're reaching out. So if you're going on their LinkedIn profile, you can definitely see potentially companies that they've worked at previously, as well as what they actually did at the companies. And I think it's much more important to include like, this is a project that you worked on. I'm really excited by learning potentially about that. Or you work at TD, for example, I would love to learn more about the culture. I would love to understand how your role fits into the overall mission of this company. Then you want to prepare for the meeting. So think back to what the research you did about this person is, and then think about what are the specific questions that I want to get answered. What am I trying to test? Am I trying to test the culture? Am I trying to test the industry? Or am I trying to test whether or not this role would be right for me? You can also ask them about the recruiting process at the end. I find that's a really good way to understand, look, do they have roles available currently? What would that process look like? And then oftentimes you can ask at the end of the meeting, you want to end with the goal. So if your goal is just to learn a little bit more, that's fine. But oftentimes it's really helpful if you're looking at a specific company to say, hey, look, I heard you speaking about this project, would love to learn a little bit more about how these types of projects are involved at XYZ firm. Would you mind connecting me with someone else at the company? And that's a really great way for you to continue that loop and continue to have discussions and conversations. And at the end of the day, make sure that you send a quick thank you email, say thank you for your time. I really enjoyed learning about XYZ topics. Thank you again. I hope to keep in touch. And that's one way that if you want to open that conversation again, the person will be more than likely open to having a further discussion. And then definitely track your efforts. So the way that I did this is very easily, you either have like a Google Sheets or a Microsoft Excel, and you essentially say, this is the company the person works at, this is the person's name, this is their email, this is the initial date that I contacted them, this is when we met. If this way that if they don't respond to you immediately, then you can come back, oh, this person hasn't responded to me in a week. Why don't I send a follow-up message? If the person doesn't reply after, I want to say 2 messages, you probably want to reach out to someone else. But this way you can track how many people you've contacted and think about whether or not this is the type of company for you. In terms of tips, these are more for in-person, but it can often also apply to a virtual environment. So if you're in person, you want to make sure that when you're in a networking room, you want to scan the room, maybe get a drink just to give yourself a bit of time to relax. Make sure that you realize that like first impressions really matter. So make sure that you're poised, make sure that you're asking good questions, and that you're not just talking over other people in the networking circle. I think that's a common error that people might make in a networking circle because it shows that you're not necessarily a team player. Once again, prepare. If it's an info session, ask about questions that they discussed in the information session, ask about their personal experiences. Make sure you turn off your cell phone. It's a pretty easy thing to do. And even if you're at home, just turn the ringer off in a virtual setting because it can be a little bit distracting if your phone rings. And then make sure that you're keeping your attention on the person you're speaking with, especially in person. It's a bit easier to tell whether or not someone's paying attention. Online, it's a little bit different, but as long as you're really taking in the information that they're telling you and making sure that you're asking genuine questions, it's pretty easy to make that connection. When it's in person, don't be the last to leave the event. Oftentimes, I find at our company, there might be an event that goes on until 8 p.m. and then there'll be people who are trying to continue the event, but it's probably more effective just to reach out to the people that you had a conversation with if you have additional questions rather than asking the reps to stay until like 8:30, 9, etc. And final tip here is get organized, take notes. In a virtual setting, you probably won't have their business card, but you'll have their name. And I find it's especially important to write down these details so that you can make that email reach out post networking event. Next, let's talk about interviews. So what does this look like? Let's just demystify some of the potential questions or concerns around these. So the first thing you want to do when you go into an interview, have a strong handshake. This allows you to build rapport. You can have a bit of small talk about the weather, talk about traffic, talk about current events. Then you'll likely jump into your experience. So person might ask you to walk you through the resume, tell me about yourself. These are very common example of a tell me about yourself. Hi, my name is Sharina. I grew up outside of Toronto, went to the University of Toronto, where for the first 2 years, I was really able to develop technical skills. Thereafter, I transferred to Western University's IU business program in pursuit of developing that strategic thinking and communication skills. Upon graduation, I joined Bain as an associate consultant, where I've been able to perform several cases, including an international expansion strategy, the performance improvement of a tuck-in acquisition, as well as several due diligences for our private equity clients. Overall, I believe this is a skill set that will make me an asset to ABC Co. So I think it's really important to have that last statement to talk about why would you be an asset and why you're interested in the company, and just tying it back to that overall conversation. Next, you're probably going to get asked some questions that really want to assess your true interest and passion. So why this industry? Why this company? Why this role? And you might even get things like, describe a time where you took initiative. And this will often come in the behavioral section, which will say, tell me about a time when you displayed teamwork. Tell me about a time when you showed initiative. And an example of how to respond to that would be, during my summer as a sales representative at Aritzia, I took the after-hours shift, which required us to stock the shipments. Unfortunately, a couple of other sales associates fell ill and were unable to come to their shifts. As such, I contacted a few other sales representatives asking if they could help fill in. By doing so, we made sure that we had all 5,000 new items in stock prior to the store opening. So this shows what was the context there, what was the action, and what was the result. And I'll talk a little bit more about how to structure these types of responses to make them the most effective possible. At the end, you'll likely ask a few questions. They'll say, hey, look, these are all the questions I have for you. Do you have any questions for me? And this is a space for you to really think about what are the top of mind things you would want to know about this company before joining. So really effective things could be, what is the culture like at this company? How do you feel that it's embodied by the people who are at the firm? Or you can ask them, what does the professional development opportunity look like here? Is there a very strict feedback cycle? What do reviews look like, and how do you feel that this has improved your development as a professional in the work environment? You can also ask them, what is the most interesting project that you worked on so far at the company? How do you see the transition going from an early analyst into now a manager? They'll likely be in a more senior position. It's really great time to pick their brain. And then at the end of your interview, you will follow up with a thank you. And one thing that you can definitely do is reach out after and say, hey, look, I really appreciate you taking the time. I look forward to any next steps or open to any questions that you might have. So why don't we double click into what is the CAR method look like, or otherwise known as context, action, and results. So these are very common for your tell me about a time, describe for me, walk me through a time. You want to start with what was the issue at hand, what's the context there, what was the opportunity that you might have recognized. In my example with Aritzia, it was that several of the associates fell ill and they couldn't come in for their shifts. Next, you want to talk about what was the action that you took, what was your role, how did you influence or control the situation. Once again, in that situation, it was I contacted a few other sales associates. And then at the end, what's that outcome? What was the result? What was the impact? And here we were talking about, by doing so, I was really able to make sure that all 5,000 new items were in stock prior to the store opening. And this shows that you'd had the initiative to call these individuals, but also that the result of this was that there was no disruption to the business overall. And you can often close with, and I would ensure that if I were given this role, I would ensure to apply the same type of initiative here. So that allows you to tie back to the company you're interviewing for and allows you to have that comment done at the end of the day. I think another tip on interviews is that before you walk into your interview, you probably want to think about what are the key skills that they're looking for. For example, in consulting, we're often looking for team players, people with leadership skills, people who have initiative, people who have analytical skills and communication skills. So you can often build almost a matrix of what are the key skills on the x-axis, and then on the y-axis, what are the different experiences that could speak to each of these. And it allows you to think about, wow, these are all the things that I've done. This is how they'll align with these different types of skills, and allows you to have a bit more preparation before going into an interview, where then if you're put on the spot, you should think about, okay, wait, what's a story that I can tell about teamwork versus if you had prepared for it in advance and thought about these stories. Oftentimes, stories can also speak to different skills and topics. So if you have 5 stories, they'll probably be able to cover several different questions that your interviewer might ask in terms of behavioral areas. Finally, I'd love to cover the topic of what does this look like in a digital world? I'm sure it's all top of mind for you, and happy to answer any questions at the end of the presentation if you want to talk about this further. So before your interview, a few days before and on the day of, you really want to test your tech. Make sure that it works, check your internet connectivity, confirm that your camera works, confirm that your microphone works. You definitely don't want tech issues to be something that prevents you from having a successful interview. And don't get too stressed about this though. If something happens, make sure you reach out to the recruiter in advance. And that's why you want to check a few days beforehand, because if there are any issues, you definitely want to make sure that they're aware. Then the next topic is you probably want to set your working space to minimize distraction. So you don't want your phone that might be flashing in front of you consistently. Make sure that you have good lighting in the room. Often if you face a window, that's a great place to be, or facing some kind of light, so that it brings some kind of light to your face and makes you feel a little bit more enthusiastic, a little bit happier, etc. Next, you want to be focused and well prepared. So just because you're on the computer doesn't mean you can start Googling things. Because there is the audio factor, they can hear you if you're typing and looking up answers to questions that they might have, especially if they're technical skill questions. So just make sure that you're focused and well prepared there. Next, you want to monitor your body language. You want to communicate with confidence by sitting up, keeping the camera at eye level. A trick to do this, especially if you're only using a laptop, is put like a box or a few books underneath your laptop to bring it up to eye level, So it actually feels like you're connecting with the person very similarly to if you were sitting across the table from them. And then you want to dress well and look professional while you're performing the interview. Just because you're at home doesn't mean that you're going to be wearing your PJs for your interview. And then the last tip here is make sure that you follow up within 24 hours to thank your interviewer for their time and let them know that you'll be available for any further questions. I think the most important thing here at the end of the day is just to be really authentic, to be yourself. You don't want to be working at a company where you consistently have to be putting a face over who you are. And the reason why I love working at Bain is just because of the culture that we do have and the ability for me to be myself and bring my full self to work. So last thing here, just some final key takeaways to review what we've discussed today. For cover letters and resumes, always be results oriented. At the end of the day, they want to know what you can bring to the table. They want to know what you can bring to the organization before they give you the interview. You want to showcase why you will provide that value to the firm, and you can definitely communicate that through your cover letter and your resume. And make sure that you use the ACE framework. So make sure that you have a strong action word, you give them a bit of context, and then at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you represent what the end result of your action was. Make sure that you use numbers, like I mentioned before, makes it a bit easier for people to hold on to the impact that you made. Then you want to think about networking. So you make sure that you prepare for any time, whether it's a coffee chat or if it's a big group setting. First impressions really matter. So make sure that you're not just talking over people. Make sure that you're engaged in the conversation that you're having. And then finally, jot down notes and information. After meeting 10, 20 people, it's really hard to keep all of that information in your head. So make sure you write things down so that at the end of the day, you can go back and you can reach out to them for a coffee chat. For interviews, use the CAR method, so context, action, and result. This will allow you to showcase everything that's going on, provide them with enough context so they understand the problem at hand, the action and how much initiative you took, and then the end results. Similarly to cover letters and resumes, you want to make sure that you have some kind of number or some kind of really strong result that came from the action that you took. And then make sure you find the common thread in your story, whether that's I'm someone who is really able to shift priorities quickly, whether it's you're the kind of person who's just really passionate about making other people, mentoring other people, whether that's I always bring a lot of energy to my teams. You want to make sure that you find that common thread so that at the end of the day, when the person walks away from your interview, they're like, hey, look, that person would be a great addition to our team because they would bring a lot of energy. And the last topic here is virtual best practices. Make sure you check your tech, whether it's audio, visual, etc. Minimize distractions, and then sit up and keep the camera at eye level. So this is the end of my presentation, but happy to answer any questions. Really excited to hear what you have for me.
Thank you so much, Sharina. So we already have some questions here, and I can read them out loud, and you can maybe answer them. Okay, so you mentioned the GPA, mentioning your GPA. There's countries that don't have a GPA grading system. Should they bother mentioning anything there, or like just put like a percentile or something?
Yeah, so what I would say there is if you have a percentile, one of the universities I went to actually had a percentile as well. You can put the percentage. You can say my average percentile is, let's say, 88%. Or there's often GPA converters. So typically what I see is on a scale of 4. So out of 4.0, I think like 88% is around like 3.82. So you can use that to convert it to make it a bit easier for your resume to reviewer to think about it. But I don't think they would be opposed. I think it's important to have that number there just to allow them to know what kind of student you were, especially if you're a new grad.
Thank you. And where on your resume should you put your interests or hobbies?
Yeah, so for that, I usually put it at the very end. So just like one line on my resume, I put education, really interested in social impact. I also put things like skiing. I used to be a competitive dancer, so I have that on there as well. It's just like a couple fun facts about you, because especially if you're talking to someone who might be really interested in like music, they might connect with you on that point and ask you about it.
Thank you. Some people are asking about the recording, so I'll just repeat myself again. You can watch the recording after the webinar is done. Once the recording is ready, I would give it another 2 hours. You can use the same Zoom link that you used to join today, and you can watch the recording again. If you're not able to find the link again, you will get a recording within 48 hours. So keep an eye on your inbox. Okay, so next question here is, do I showcase only the impacts that they've made on the company as an end result? How about like societal impacts, like if you've made an impact outside of your company?
Yeah, so for me, I have at the top all of my work experiences, then I have my education, and then I have volunteer work. So for example, I volunteered with ACCESS Employment. One of the things I put on there is I mentored over 15 female immigrants on recruiting, enabling them, over 50% of them to secure positions within a month, which is really exciting for me and brings me a lot of joy. And I think, yeah, you can definitely include things that you've done for society. I also did pro bono consulting, so I also have that on my resume. And I think like it's important to show that you're a well-rounded individual, so I would definitely include that as well.
Thank you. And when answering a question during an interview, how much time should you take per question?
Yeah, so I think it really depends on what type of question it is. If it's a behavioral question, I would say like 2 to 3 minutes. You want to make sure that you give them enough context to understand, because if you don't, they won't know exactly what you did. But like we showed in the ARC, you want to spend 60% of the time actually talking about what you did, and then at the end talking about that result. So I'd say 2 to 3 minutes is typically good enough. But if it's a more technical question, it could definitely go on for a bit longer.
Thank you. If someone's applying for a job and they don't have any experience in that position, should they be applying for that job? Should they be, tailoring their resume for that job?
Yeah, so as a student, especially like I didn't have any experience necessarily as a marketer, but I still applied for marketing positions. I think if you're able to display passion for the position, then you can definitely apply for it. And I think if you're someone who's a bit more experienced in the workplace, there's definitely skills that you can attribute to a new industry. I think like I said before, it's important to identify what are the key skills that you would need for that position, even if it's a different industry. So for example, if I wanted to go into marketing, a lot of the skills from consulting are transferable: communication skills, teamwork, leadership skills. And oftentimes you don't have to know the exact content unless you're looking for a chief digital officer position. If you don't have those technical skills, then you'll probably need to develop those. But if you're looking for a more general position, I think you can definitely apply. I don't think it hurts to apply. Just make sure that you tailor what experience you do have, or even if you were in school and you had clubs that you were a part of, putting those towards what you could do to add value to the company.
Thank you. And does your interview advice change because of the pandemic right now?
In terms of how I structure my responses, or in terms, sorry, just would love a bit more context on that.
I guess like because you can't really, make eye contact, you can't do all of those things. So did you have like maybe 1 or 2 virtual interview tips?
Yeah, so to be honest, I have done like interviews and interview prep for a lot of my interview buddies in Bain, and the advice that I've given them isn't really too different, other than like I said, you want to make sure that your computer or webcam's at your eye level so it actually feels like you're talking to them. But in terms of how you're structuring your responses, you want to structure in the same way. You want to make sure that you're providing them with context, action, and results. definitely still follow up. I think the only difference is you might not have a handshake at the very beginning, but beyond that, they're still looking for high quality individuals who can bring something to the team.
Thank you. So this question comes up a lot. We tell everyone to tailor their resume for each position, yet their LinkedIn profile is always the same. How can they, overcome that challenge?
Yeah, so I personally think that if you're looking for a role in a specific industry, or if you're looking for a role that is a specific type of role, so for example, like you're looking for all consultant positions or you're looking for all operations positions, then you don't have to tailor your LinkedIn as much, especially because LinkedIn versus your resume is LinkedIn's everything you've done, whereas your resume is really what is most important for the context of that interview. I think if you have a really strong resume, they likely won't go to your LinkedIn, to be honest. And your cover letter also provides you with a little bit more space to talk about yourself and to tailor your overall message to the company. So I think with LinkedIn, like include everything you can. And if you're looking for a job in the same area, then I don't think it'll make too much of a difference in terms of the skills that you'll need. So just make sure that you include it all.
Thank you. So yes, if someone has any gaps on their resume, how do they address that?
Yeah, so honestly, I think your cover letter is a great space to address that gap. Or if you did, there might be a gap, but you might have done something else outside of that. So for example, when I was mentoring the female immigrants, a lot of times they took a gap to take care of their children. And even if you were taking care of your children, you might have been part of the parent society, you might have been volunteering outside of just taking care of your children. So you can definitely include that as well in your volunteer work, and that helps to close the gap on your resume. And then on your cover letter, you can say, hey, look, I'm looking to get back into the workforce. I still think my skills are very applicable. You might want to take a course or two just to make sure that you're up to date with everything that's going on in that sector. But beyond that, you can also address it in your tell me about yourself. So say, hi, my name is Shrina. Over the past 5 years, I took a break to take care of my children. But prior to that, I was an analyst at Bain & Company, where I was able to do a lot of strategic thinking. And I've been keeping up to date with what's going on in the industry, and I think I would still be able to provide a lot of value to the organization overall. So I think your resume, your cover letter, and then ultimately your interview is a great space for you to help close that gap and allow your interviewers to know what's going on.
Thanks, Sharina. Next question here is networking and reaching out to recruiters. How can you get a hold of a recruiter? Because people reach out to them on LinkedIn or email them. Like, is it okay to call them directly? How do you get their attention?
Yeah, so to be honest, I wouldn't recommend calling them. They often have a lot of things to do outside of just taking coffee chats. They'll be organizing events. They will be coordinating for the interview process. And oftentimes, depending on your industry, so for example, at Bain, our recruiter might coordinate the events and do some of the selection of the resumes, but our consultants and the people at the firm actually vet all of the resumes. We vet all of the cover letters, and we have discussion on who we think would be best to interview. So reaching out to people who might be looking at your resume or might be part of that interview process are just as key as a recruiter. So would definitely recommend, once again, reaching out through email rather than through LinkedIn. LinkedIn's a great way just to figure out where the person's working, what they've done. But I think oftentimes people, especially at work from home, they're always on their emails. So if they see your email come through, they're probably more likely to respond on the spot versus LinkedIn. They'll probably check it